Welcome Rachel Barton Pine to our Meet the Artist program, which is a series of interviews with our guest artists, guest conductors, to enhance your understanding of classical music, the program that we are playing, and what we do in the community. So, Rachel, welcome.
Good to be here.
I am also very pleased to welcome back our founding music director and conductor laureate, Boris Brott.
Thank you, Natalia. It's a great pleasure to be back. It's wonderful to see so many wonderful friends that I've made over the years, and to work with our great orchestra. And also to introduce such a wonderful young artist whom I have not yet had the pleasure of working with, except for last night, the first time. Oh. My brother Dennis has spoken of her for many years, most warmly, and this is the first opportunity we've had to work together. And you brought your guiro along. What was that? Tell us what that was.
Okay, so I just did, it's actually my own Piazzolla tango medley. With my arrangement of his Tango Etude No. 3 combined with the Liber Tango from my most recent CD, Capriccio Latino.
When is it coming out? Or
oh, it's out. Yes. It's unaccompanied works by Spanish and Latin American composers. Lots of fun stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun, so thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about the instrument? I know Boris mentioned that it's very rare.
Yes, so my violin was made in 1742 by Guarneri del Gesù. Guarneri and Stradivari are considered to be the two greatest violin makers ever, and it's really just a matter of taste which one you prefer, kind of like white wine and red wine. The Stradivari's are very sweet, very golden tone colors, and the Guarneri's tend to be deeper and darker, very rich and powerful, especially on the lower end of the range, though they can certainly be sweet when they need to. And there are fewer than a tenth as many Guarneri del Gesùs remaining in the world as there are Stradivari's. So for somebody who prefers that sound, it's really, really lucky to have the opportunity to play one. Now my violin, as I said, made in the year 1742, the same year as the Guarneri del Gesù that Paganini played. Wow. People like Chrysler, Heifetz, Isaac Stern have all played Guarneri's. Perlman and Anna-Sophie Mutter play Strads. Josh Bell plays a Strad. But anyways, my instrument, the instrument that I'm borrowing, it has a nickname, like many of the old Italians do. Always has to be somebody no longer alive. So if I play it for my career...
Are they Jewish?
It's sort of tradition. I mean, maybe someday it will be known as the X-Pine, but I will never be around to find out about it. But it was once played in the early 1800s. It was played by Antonio Bazzini, who's most famous for his virtuoso piece, The Round of the Goblins. And then in the latter part of the 1800s, it was the concert instrument of Marie Soldat, one of the rare 19th century women violin soloists. So it actually bears the nickname Ex-Soldat. Marie Soldat was an Austrian violinist. She was discovered when she was a teenager by Brahms. And Brahms introduced her to his best friend and collaborator, the great violinist Joseph Joachim, who became her teacher. But Brahms remained in her life as a mentor for the rest of his life. They frequently played chamber music together, with Brahms playing the piano. Marie Soldat was one of the first champions of the Brahms Violin Concerto, which she premiered in Vienna and many other European cities, and it became her signature piece. And it was Brahms who decided that she needed a really good instrument to use for her concerts. He found an aristocratic family who agreed to buy a violin for her use, and Brahms himself picked this one. So it's
Quite a legacy.
yeah,
Wow.
pretty,
Quite a legacy.
pretty amazing to think that he must have had his music in mind, at least subconsciously. It sounds just so glorious in all repertoire, but particularly the big romantic literature. But it's also awesome to think that, you know, Marie Soldat played this violin, and she played chamber music with Brahms, which means my violin got to jam with Brahms.
Absolutely. And you
It's
weren't
so
there to
special.
enjoy it. But now when you play Brahms, you'll enjoy that relationship. And a violin, in a way, belonging to you is, I mean, it's sort of like having more than an affair, it's a marriage.
Well, like I said, this violin belongs to my patron. But, you know, when it comes to these instruments, they outlive us. So even if you do, in fact, legally own an instrument, you can only ever feel like you're its temporary caretaker.
Yeah, but that reminds me a little of that story of Heifetz, who was approached after a concert by a patron and said, "Oh, Maestro Heifetz, your violin, it's so beautiful. The sound of your violin." So Heifetz reached into the box and held the violin up to his ear, and he said, "Funny, I don't hear a thing."
Well, of course, you could say the same about him. Without a violin in his hands, you
Well,
don't
of
hear
course,
anything.
but that was
It's
the
a real
point.
partnership.
The point is that it is a
Yeah.
partnership, and the violin, in fact, doesn't live unless you play it.
Yeah,
The
well,
other
they
thing-
How
really
long have
ought
you
to-
had it,
And they are
Rachel?
living voices. So when you have these things stored in a vault and not played, and people buy them for investments and so on, it's a tragedy because they're not supposed to be works of visual art.
It's even a greater tragedy because if they're not played, they die.
Yeah.
They actually physically die. The vibrations going through those instruments keep the instrument, the wood, the varnish, keep that alchemy of that sound alive.
Well, think
And
about
to
if you
put it in a
didn't
museum.
speak for years and years, your voice would be pretty rusty.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had the privilege of playing this for 10 years now.
10 years.
Or 11, yeah, ever since 2002 when I recorded the Brahms Concerto with the Chicago Symphony. And
So
it's-
you were 6.
That brings me to another question. How old were you when you started playing violin?
well, I was 3 years old. I had seen some middle school age girls playing violin in my church, and I was really intrigued by the sound of the instrument, and I also loved their beautiful long dresses.
That's how it all starts.
Usually the dresses.
Well, it's awesome now. I get to wear these gorgeous concert gowns, and they're tax deductible.
That's great. Rachel, you were the youngest violinist who won violin competition. How was it for you? How old were you at that time?
Yeah, so when I was 17, I became the first American and youngest person to win the gold medal at the Bach International Competition in Leipzig. And, you know, the music of Bach, I hesitate to ever say that any composer is my favorite because I feel like I'm insulting all the other composers that I love. It's like picking among your children or something. But the music of Bach is very special to me because I did grow up playing music in my church. In fact, our sanctuary, you know, in addition to all the usual stained glass windows of Bible characters and whatever, we had a stained glass window of Bach in the mix. It had been a former German Lutheran congregation before it became Congregational United Church of Christ, and you know, there was Bach, and we had the big organ, and every Sunday morning the organist would play toccatas and fugues, and you know, for a long time growing up, I somehow thought Bach must be in the Bible, actually. And but his music just, you know, whatever your beliefs are, I really feel like Bach's music takes you to a very spiritual place. And, you know, whenever I'm on stage playing, whatever I'm playing, you know, I always try to remember, you know, what it means to be a musician, which is what I learned at church, which is, you know, to develop your talent, to share it with others, to uplift their spirits. And so when I went to the Bach competition, it was just a question of, you know, playing my best and enjoying the experience. And it was a great honor, you know, to win, and it certainly helped launch my career and all that. But it was just
And you've been
so amazing to,
traveling since,
it's always really special to play the music of a certain composer in their hometown. Last year, I finally got to play the Tchaikovsky Concerto in Moscow, to play Mozart in Salzburg, Bach in Leipzig. You know, there's something special about that.
I'm sure for the audience members too, it's probably the warmest reception. I know every time I hear Tchaikovsky, he is one of my favorite composers. Every time I hear it, I have a special, it has a special meaning for me. And yesterday when you were rehearsing with the orchestra, I was so delighted. Can you tell us, it's one of my favorite questions. How did you find the orchestra? How was the rehearsal? And how did you find Boris?
So you want all the dirt. Well, you know, as Boris mentioned, I've known his brother for 10 years. And so I mean, they could be twins. It's uncanny.
Well, he's younger and handsomer and thinner.
But it's really cool because I almost feel like, obviously you're a totally separate person, but there's, yeah, it's something really cool to just be like, oh, wow, I feel like I know this guy even though I don't yet. But no, it was really neat to just, every time you come back to one of these concertos that you play over and over and over again, many, many times every year, it's one of the favorites, you constantly being asked to perform it. And yet, the fact that I have the privilege of touring around and doing it so often with different musicians each time, you're always re-inspired. Because the oboe player of that orchestra might phrase it exactly like this, or the cello section brings this kind of energy, and then of course with a conductor who's collaborating with you to mold the music, you're exploring it anew every time. And
so how did you find it? You're not answering the question.
oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was. No, it was.
Boris is a great accompanist. That I know.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And some of the pitfalls simply weren't. There was even one spot where I've never been able to have a conductor successfully follow me in this spot. And so I've just gotten into the habit of suggesting to the conductor that I follow them, because you know what? Better to just play it safe. And Boris was waiting for me to do something so that he could follow me, and I was waiting for him, and the next note never happened, and then he said, well, I'll follow you, and I said, are you really sure? And so finally I was like, okay, well, this isn't going to work, but we'll try it because he's insisting, and he followed me. I was like, wow, this is a miracle.
Well, you're so attractive, it's very difficult not to follow you.
Boris, can you tell us a little bit more about the program that we are performing this weekend?
Well, we're performing two really monumental pieces of music. The Tchaikovsky is in and of itself unique, iconic. And the Beethoven is an extraordinary piece of music because it is in fact a turning point historically in music, and a turning point in civilization. Up until that point, music was rather formulaic. It was sponsored by the church or sponsored by nobility. And there were certain conventions that you simply didn't cut across. You would never, for fear of excommunication or fear of being let go, dismissed summarily. But Beethoven had this rather difficult upbringing. His father really wanted him to be a Mozart, and he didn't have the talent to be a Mozart. He wasn't a person who kind of fell into his music easily. And so he was really bullied by his father very seriously. And an awkward person. He wasn't very pretty to look at. He had a pockmarked face. He was bullied by his students and so on. So he developed in Vienna, and talking about Bach and improvisation, it's really interesting that Beethoven made his first career moves in Vienna by his talent for improvisation. And he would get up, and the audience would give him a few notes, and he would improvise for an hour. And of course, it was really important, those improvisations, because there was no, you didn't have any copyright law in those days. So really being able to kind of improvise on the spot was very important. Anyway, I'm getting away from the subject, but the subject was that Beethoven was very much inspired by Napoleon, who was at that point in the process of freeing the ordinary peasant from being subjugated by royalty. And he really felt very strongly about this personally. And it inspired him, perhaps. I mean, I wasn't there, so I can't say for sure, but I think he was inspired by the French ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And so he wrote this piece, which was completely groundbreaking. He broke every single rule of conventional composition in this work. And it's a 50-minute symphony. No one had ever seen a symphony that long before. It's a work that really wrenches away at your inner feelings, communicates his inner feelings, and he does so with music, which is, after all, just a collection of notes. But he does it in a way that really grabs us as listeners, and certainly grabs me as an interpreter. It's a work that grows on you, that really you never really are. I think back to the very first time I performed, for instance, the Marcha Funèbre, and I was 14 years old. I was studying at l'Instituto Nacional de Bellas Artes in Mexico. And Igor Markovich, who was my teacher, assigned this movement for me to conduct in a concert with the orchestra. And one of the other students in the chorus, who was in his 30s, was appalled. And he went to Markovich and said, how can you ask a 14-year-old to play a funeral march? What do they know about a funeral march? I was, of course, very offended. But now, looking back, I realize truly what was being said, because in order to appreciate this music, in order truly to understand this music, you have to have lived life. You have to have lived the disappointments of life. You have to understand what Beethoven was trying to say. And I think, therefore, the maturity of audiences is equally important, because, in a way, you will understand this piece. And so it's a very, very important work, and it's a work that's extremely challenging for the orchestra to play. And I have to say that I really enjoyed the rehearsal, the very first rehearsal, because we ran through the work with nary a stop. And the orchestra was just so much into it, and I think you will find that in the performance, and I encourage you likewise to let your spirit free.
Well, don't you think that that's an element that actually relates both pieces? They come from different parts of the world,
Yes.
different generations, but they're both really composing on that human level, that personal level. When you think about, at least among violin concertos, you know, Mozart is about joy and sparkling playfulness. You know, the Brahms is the majesty of creation. You know, things that are beyond ourselves, or, you know, which has its place. But Tchaikovsky, it's all about what he's going through.
Absolutely.
I just recently listened to your podcast about that concerto, and I have to be honest with you. I grew up in Soviet Russia, so I went to music school, and we never knew that Tchaikovsky was gay. So when I came to the United States and somebody told me that, I said, no, all my books cannot be wrong, you know. So listening to your podcast, I understood a little bit more about that concerto, and it opened up a little bit more for me as well. Could you share with us the personal story and what you have experienced?
Well, Tchaikovsky, you know, was very caught up in writing his opera, and you know, when a troubled young woman who was one of his students, you know, said that if he didn't marry her, she was going to kill himself. It was similar enough to his opera plot that he sort of got caught up in the whole drama, the real life drama, and he did indeed marry her.
She was going to commit suicide.
Yeah. So to save her from committing suicide, he married her, but the experience was so traumatic that he tried to commit suicide. And luckily he didn't succeed, but he went away to kind of, you know, just get himself, you know, some equilibrium back. And so the first movement is just full of so much angst and, you know, unresolved feelings, and, you know, the second movement is so heartbreakingly lonely. But then he was hanging out. We don't know the extent of, you know, exactly what the relationship was, whether it was, you know, platonic or otherwise. And that's not really important. But he was hanging out with a friend of his, a violinist, and, you know, the experience of making music together and spending time together, he cheered up. And so the last movement is not just happy again, it's almost boisterously, exuberantly happy, because of what this relationship might have been rumored to be, true or not. You know, rumor can be equally devastating, whether, you know, it's based in reality. So because there might have been this gossip, unfortunately, this violinist who inspired the writing of this concerto and was the first one to, you know, try it out, and, you know, he couldn't be given the premiere. And so the premiere was given to somebody else who didn't quite understand the music, didn't quite technically play it well, hence the infamous review about this is music that stinks to the ear, and the violin was beaten black and blue. Because
Mr.
obviously...
Hanslick.
Yes.
But you know what is interesting, I find interesting about the concerto in the sense of the relationship with the young violinist, is that surely the young violinist would have given him some inkling as to technique.
Yeah.
And this concerto, in that way, I find that the Beethoven and Tchaikovsky are, in a way, twins, in the sense that it challenged the technical ability of that time. to play the violin?
Well, here's something interesting. Leopold Auer ultimately ended up taking up the concerto after first rejecting it, but he only did so after having fixed some spots. And because he was, the
And
great...
he practiced for hours and hours.
Yeah. And because he was the great pedagogue, the teacher of Oistrakh and Heifetz and Milstein and all of those guys, he taught them his version of the Tchaikovsky concerto. And then, of course, those were the revered soloists of that generation. So the next generation played the Tchaikovsky the way that their heroes had played it. And these fixes by Auer sort of perpetuated. And it wasn't until recently, really my generation, I guess, that people started to go back to the score and say, wait a sec, maybe Tchaikovsky actually knew what he was doing and we should just play the notes he wrote. And especially the last movement, which has a certain amount of repetitiveness, which I think is not a flaw of its composition, but really the fact that it almost feels like Tchaikovsky has one foot in the folk music world. And having played a lot of different folk music styles myself, that is a really strong element of most of the world's folk music, is a certain repetitiveness that actually gets you in a groove. It's not about being uncreative or boring or all these dumb fiddlers just play the same thing over and over. It's really about just,
grooving.
Yeah, and that's what this last movement really does when you embrace its repetitiveness and just go for it.
Well, that brings us to another request. What would you play for us as your second piece on the program?
Okay, well, we were talking about my violin and its history, so I think I will play a little Brahms. This is actually from my next album, which will be released at the end of April, called Violin Lullabies, the first ever collection of classical lullabies for the violin by everybody from Fauré and Ravel to Respighi, Sibelius, etc. But this one is, of course, a transcription of Brahms's famous vocal lullaby, transcription by the great American soloist Albert Spalding. And I think my violin knows how it goes.
Please. While Rachel is going to the microphone, I have to tell you that yesterday she did a wonderful community engagement recital. We were at Los Robles Hospital, and Rachel performed for rehab patients in Los Robles Hospital, and she really, truly inspired us. So without further ado, Rachel Barton Pine. Rachel, thank you.
I have a
Such
question.
a delight.
Rachel, now as a young mother, And having gone through a pregnancy, and I'm no doubt you played all the way through that pregnancy, does your child now particularly resonate to certain works that you may have played during the last trimester of your pregnancy?
Very specific
I was
question.
thinking about that, during the gestation, because my youngest sister, who's 12 years younger than me, the piece that I was practicing at the end of my mother's pregnancy was Paganini's Concerto No. 1, which, if you're familiar with that work, it starts ya-da-da-da-dum-bum, ya-da-da-da-da. It's very bombastic and just intense and loud and exciting. And somehow or another, whatever beautiful, slow adagio I would try to play to lull her to sleep when she was a newborn, it never worked. But if I played that loud, crashy Paganini, she would get so content and curl up into the fetal position. And so it was obviously the associations more than the inherent affect of the composition. So I thought, that's just so disconcerting. I want to make sure that I have something nice and soft and pretty that I can train my unborn child on, so that then when she is born, I can send her to sleep with that piece. Well, first of all, I had so many concerts up till the end that I was playing different pieces every single week, so there was no one piece that ended up being our leitmotif. And then after she was born, actually, if I was trying to put her to sleep, I wasn't standing over the cradle, I was holding her in my arms and singing. So having not used my voice, because I'm always touring, I can't go to church anymore. I'm flying home on Sunday from wherever I performed on Saturday, so I don't have the weekly hymn singing.
I recommend the shower.
Yeah, well, I sing along to the radio, but it's usually my favorite heavy metal song, so that's not really singing. Or in a master class, I'll demonstrate how a phrase should not be phrased, and I always do that vocally so I don't mess up my own playing. I'll say, you shouldn't start the Tchaikovsky like da ya da da, whatever, in a master class. So I hadn't really sung and tried to sound pretty with my voice since I was a teenager. So I had to get my vocal cords going, but actually, so there are certain songs that I sing to my baby that she now knows and recognizes. But as far as prenatally, unfortunately, I think,
You'll have to try something in reverse. When I was in my mother's womb, and I know this only in reverse, my mother's a cellist and played a lot of string quartets. And so, of course, I was rather close to her instrument. And when I was studying the violin, which I started at the age of 3, just like Rachel, and I was learning quartets. I was playing in a quartet. I was about 6 or 7. And there were certain pieces, individual works, where I could literally take out a piece of manuscript and write out the cello part, not the violin part. Oh. And I went to my mother and said, how is that possible? Why? And my mother's very organized, and she kept all the programs from the entire history of the McGill String Quartet. And she looked up the dates of the works in question. Wow. And found that, in fact, she was performing, rehearsing those works as a cellist in the string quartet during the last trimester of her pregnancy with me. And it was quite an interesting story. And, in interviews, people always ask the same questions inevitably. And they say, well, when did you first realize you had an affection for classical music? And I thought I'd be particularly flip. So I said, in my mother's womb. I had an inn at the womb. Well, at least there was womb in the inn. But anyway, there was a doctor who heard, Dr. Charles Varney, who heard the broadcast, and he got back in touch with me because he was writing a book which is in existence today called The Secret Life of the Inborn Child. And it is really, and I've got a chapter in this book. So when I toured to different places, inevitably, they're not interested in my musical career at all, but they want to know about the book. But what you should do is, first of all, you should teach the child the cello. I know she's starting the violin, but you should teach the child cello.
That's what I told my husband, and he said, we already have so much stuff to carry everywhere we travel.
Well, there is a transportational challenge aspect of the cello, but you know why? Because first of all, you'll be able to play with her, which would be phenomenal.
That's what I said.
Secondly, you can try this out in reverse. Because now we'll see whether, when you were playing quartets and quintets and she was in utero, that she will remember the violin line while she was playing the cello line. How about that?
Well, Well, I do know that she just loves to dance to music. It's really uncanny. She has a very steady beat. Whenever when she was just a tiny little baby, she'd start to bang on something. It was always perfectly metronomic.
Wow. And she felt so comfortable on stage yesterday. Rachel travels with her husband 100% of the time and the baby. So
And
she
a nanny from an agency
nanny.
of nannies for traveling musicians.
It's amazing.
I didn't know that existed.
Yeah.
My goodness,
Nannies for
who knows?
traveling musicians.
Yep.
So her husband brought Sylvia, her 17-month-old, to the rehearsal yesterday, and she felt so comfortable. She was comfortable on stage. She was comfortable with us, with musicians. So how old was she when she started traveling with you?
3 weeks.
Well, she would have to. They're sort of attached. For at least for a while.
I can imagine.
Yeah, well, you know, people would say, "Oh, are you bringing your baby?" And I would say, "Well, she has to follow the food."
Exactly.
Yeah, she has 13 stamps in her passport so far.
Fantastic.
That's more
And
than Boris has.
next year, when we have to start buying her own airplane ticket, she'll be, well, you have to start buying them their own airplane ticket when they're 2. So by the time she's 3, she will be an executive platinum flyer.
Marvelous. And she can get upgraded all by herself.
Exactly. I'll be stuck
There's
in
a
coach and
benefit
she'll
for
be
that.
up in
That's
first.
You know, we always ask traveling musicians, how do you balance your life and career? So it seems like you found the perfect solution.
Well, it's really lucky. My husband started traveling with me in '96, which was really just at the time that all of these internet and cell phones and all these things were starting to become normal. And so he could, you know, be in touch with his clients and supervise his employees and whatever he needed to do for his computer business from wherever we happened to be on the planet. And you know, as much as his company has grown and expanded over the years, he's managed to continue doing that, which is such a blessing. I don't ever have to feel like I'm away from home, because it's kind of like I bring my family with me, and you know, that hotel room is our home that week, and then the next hotel room is our home the next week, and we're just a little gypsy family.
Very talented. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, when I read your bio, I noticed that you have a foundation and you support young musicians. How did it start, and what is the purpose of the foundation?
Yeah, so the Rachel Elizabeth Barton Foundation, which my husband and I started before we were married, so that's why it bears my maiden name. Rachel Elizabeth Barton Foundation supports young artists through 2 main programs: the Grants for Education and Career, which is fairly unique for its type. It identifies young artists based on 3 criteria. Their level of, I hate to use the word talent, but really, you know, accomplishment, and their love of music. So in other words, if they're the best player but they are planning to go into medicine, then we want to support somebody else. And also their financial circumstances. So based on those 3 criteria, we support them financially, not with scholarships, because, you know, the idea is you can usually get some kind of financial aid at the institution where you're taking your lessons, but we help them with all of those out-of-pocket expenses. We also have an instrument loan program, which some of the instruments are in our permanent collection, gifts from people who inherited them or from makers. Some of them belong to third parties who are loaning them through our foundation. We have everything from rare antiques to high-quality contemporary instruments. But of course, there are other instrument loan programs out there, and we're happy to be one of them. But the Grants for Education and Career is particularly close to my heart because it really reflects my childhood experience growing up in a family where my father was unemployed most of the time and my mom was taking care of the kids, and you know, our phone and electricity were always getting cut off. Sometimes we didn't know, you know, how we were going to pay for groceries that week and still be able to fill the tank with gas to drive out to our lessons and rehearsals. We were always one payment away from losing the roof over our heads. So it was a very precarious existence. And while I did, in fact, have a scholarship for my lessons, you know, trying to pay for all those other things, sheet music of the pieces you're supposed to learn, new strings for your violin, new hair for your bow, piano accompanist fees, audition recording sessions, airfare to go to competitions, even concert clothes. All of these things a young artist has to pay for out of their own pocket. And it was, you know, thanks to the generosity of some individuals who stepped up at the last minute at various junctures that I was able to continue pursuing my dream in the face of these insurmountable odds. And so I wanted to sort of honor them and return the favor by helping out young artists. I'll give you an example of the type of thing we do. So there is a single mother with a 13-year-old daughter The girl had a scholarship to study at Juilliard Pre-College, but the family lived in upstate New York. And they literally didn't have enough money to pay for the gas, tolls, and parking to go to New York City every week to take the free lessons. And that's where our foundation came in. So it's been a great blessing to be able to help, I think at this point, more than 50 young artists.
Fantastic. It's so nice.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's so nice to hear that you're supporting. New West Symphony also has education programs, and I was very delighted. Last month, we had a week of concerts with elementary school children, ages grades 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders in Oxnard, Thousand Oaks, and Santa Monica. And it was such a delight to get letters back because we created programs specifically for them. So it's an interactive concert, and Boris started them back in 1995 to give back to the community. And this year that we reached out to over 6,000 elementary school students.
Well, and you're sending me tomorrow morning to work with
middle school.
Beginning strings, intermediate strings, and advanced strings.
Thank you so much for doing that. And this is one of those community engagement activities that I mentioned in the very beginning on top of the program. New West Symphony is a service-oriented organization. We'd like to give back and be present in the community, and sharing such a tremendous talent with local schools is so rewarding.
Well, you know, in fact, these first experiences for a young child who, in our society, an orchestra is a rather strange thing. You know, you have hardly anything on the radio of classical music any longer, and it's really not part of people's lives in the way that it was when I was growing up, even going back only that recently, at least recently for me.
I am not, I'm smiling.
Okay, that's okay, fine. But it is a vital experience, because that first chemical reaction, I'm going to call it, that a young person has being in a concert, seeing 50 musicians or 70 musicians on stage, performing with one another live without the aid of a microphone, with this music that connects directly to the central cortex of the human. Music has a tremendous power, and it's a seed which we plant and that will bear fruit, maybe not for 30 or 40 years. I'm never disappointed when I look at an audience and I see a lot of gray hair. I really am not, or white hair, or blue hair.
As long as it...
I really am not, because I say to myself, well, you know, it's a process. You plant that seed when a child is 6 or 7 or 8, and it bears fruit later on when that adult has time. And music does require time. It requires thought. It's not background. Today we have so much music that you can't escape. I go to a hotel, I want to talk to somebody in a lobby, and there's music playing. And it's even worse when it's classical music, because my ear's drawn to it and I can't hear the conversation. It's everywhere. Elevators, you can't escape it. And yet it's part of wallpaper. It's not really something that you think about. And music needs to be, it's participatory. The audience, you are participating with us on stage when you listen. Otherwise, we're not doing our job. We have to engage you on stage. And so I think these seeds planted early are vital for the continuation of that which we believe has a certain sacred nature, and that is the art of music.
Yeah. Boris, one of the new things that we're doing with the kids' programs, we created a 30-minute pre-show show for them. So there is a PowerPoint presentation that is on the screen, and it's interactive. The kids can answer questions. The music is playing, the excerpts from their cartoons. It was just so much fun for the musicians, because when they came on stage to warm up, they thought that they were at the baseball game, because every time the kids got the answer right, it was, yay, everybody jumps.
Well, and we're so used to watching
for half an hour,
a screen.
You see waves of kids and hands, and
well,
they loved it.
It's really interesting, because today we're so attached to electronic devices. We're so attached to screens. And the kids live, in a way, they have a facility with all of that interactive internet and screen-oriented, that's what they're used to. I mean, they're used to receiving that information that way. And so we all of a sudden, that pre-concert is a wonderful idea, because it makes stars of the orchestra before they walk on stage. So when if they've seen them on TV, obviously they must be good. If they haven't seen them on TV, they couldn't be very good. So all right, so now I've just seen them on TV. There they are live. Wow!
That's That's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about that.
It's exciting. I want to remind all of you that this Meet the Artist programs, they are to enhance your understanding of the concerts that we perform on the weekend. And I want to remind you that we perform in 3 different locations. On Fridays, we perform in Oxnard Performing Arts Center. On Saturdays, we perform at here in Thousand Oaks at Civic Arts Plaza. And on Sundays, we perform at Barnum Hall in Santa Monica. So I hope that you invite all your friends and spread the word about this phenomenal concert that is coming up this weekend. And for those of you who are watching us on TV, check out our website. We have a brand new website, www.newwestsymphony.org, and you can find our future seasons. And
there are 2 W's in it, New West. Good.
Thank you, yeah, and NEWWESTsymphony.org. We launched our website. You can leave your feedback on the website. You can buy tickets there and learn more about Rachel and Boris. One of the new things that I learned going on the website and reading your bio is that in 1996 you were their Olympic torchbearer. How did that come about? It's such an interesting...
Well, I've lived in my hometown of Chicago my entire life. And one of the advantages to staying in one place, such a great place as Chicago, I get to go everywhere else, temporarily. And, I've never felt a desire to move to New York or something and make a different city my home. I love Chicago, but my roots go so deep that I am known there. And so I guess as a local celebrity or whatever you want to call it, they did invite me to be part of the torch relay. But whenever I do these things, I always think it's really cool, not just for my own sake, getting to have fun or recognition, but really that I'm there to represent my instrument, to represent my genre of music, and to have a classical violinist, on a bigger stage like that. And the TV said Rachel Barton, violinist. That was before I was married. It's just people might say, "Oh, who's that? What does she play?" And it does lead people to discover the music. That lesson was really brought home to me actually the year before when I was invited to do the national anthem for a Chicago Bulls playoff game. Yeah. That was in the Michael Jordan era, so I got to meet Michael and Scotty. And see, I don't have to remember the words. Every once in a while when I am at an event where I have to actually sing the Star Spangled Banner, I keep thinking of what my fingerings are, and I really can't remember the words.
It's a very hard anthem to sing because it is a huge range.
Yeah.
For a Canadian or Russian, right?
I have no problems with it, but it does present difficulties musically, just simply to sing. It's not, most of us don't have a voice range of 2 octaves.
But for the violin, that was an opportunity. It allowed me to, sort of expand that range even further, put in some Paganini type of licks, and really
did you read it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You weren't frightened. That's against the law.
Maybe in Canada.
No, in the United States, it's against the law. Stravinsky rearranged the anthem for a concert in Boston, and he was arrested after the concert because there's an anthem. It's called, you cannot deface the national anthem of the United States. It's called defacement. And you cannot.
Can enhance.
Well, the statute of limitations has probably run out at this point.
Yeah. Well, there is another. I want to mention, before we run out of time, I want to mention that you use another vehicle to bring people to the classical concerts.
Yeah, well, like I said, it was that Bulls game that got me started, because after I did that, not only the 25,000 people in the stadium, but millions more on television saw this performance where I had really used it as an opportunity in 2 minutes' time to show what the violin could do. And people started coming up to me on the street saying, "Oh, I saw you on the Bulls, and I never realized that violins were so cool." And that inspired me that, I used to think, well, if you can hook them when they're children, then you've got some classical fans. But by the time they're grown-ups, if they haven't been properly exposed to it, it's just too late. But I realized, no, wait a sec, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, 40-somethings, it's just they think they know what classical is, that it's Pachelbel's canon in a dentist's waiting room, or soaring strings on a movie soundtrack. soundtrack, but have they heard a Mahler symphony? Have they heard the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto? And so one of my other great musical loves is rock and heavy metal. And so I started, it never occurred to me to play that stuff on my violin. I'd listen to it for fun at the end of a long day studying classical. But I started realizing, okay, if I could grab all those people playing the national anthem on a Bulls game, maybe I can continue that work if I can find other outlets. So I started going on rock radio stations, doing pre-concert appearances that orchestras would organize at a local bar and down the street from the concert hall. And I would start by playing a little Led Zeppelin or Metallica to kind of break down that barrier and get people hooked. And then I'd lay some Paganini on them, or some Schubert, or some Isai, or some Bach, or just other great stuff. And people realize, wow, that music is every bit as exciting as those tunes that we already know and love, and maybe I will go to the symphony tomorrow and check it out.
And people mature far later today than they used to when I was growing up. But people, my kids are in their 30s, and they're just beginning to find some security in a job and getting married and stuff like that, what we used to do when we were 20. So by the time you're 20, you're really comparing to what it was like when you were a teenager.
Well, there's nothing more rewarding than having somebody come up to me after a concert and saying, this is my first ever orchestra concert, and I just loved it.
Absolutely.
And that's really what I try to craft my interpretations such that they'll be appreciated by people who are sophisticated connoisseurs, but also understood at that gut level by people who are just experiencing that music, who might know nothing about it, but are just listening to the melodies and the emotions of the pieces.
And this is, I think, what Boris has promoted for New West Symphony over the years as well. We remove the barriers between the concert goers and the musicians. We always mingle with the concert goers after the concert at our afterglow, and we talk to our audience. And I think that that's what makes New West Symphony so unique and approachable. And thank you, Boris, for implementing that many years ago.
Well, thank you for mentioning it. But I think I have a new idea that you should look at. Right now, it really is a problem for individuals to meet one another. And the idea of getting together, they said that website called is just lunch, right?
Just a concert?
Well, yeah, I'm serious, because I think we need to provide a place for young people to meet and develop romantic attachments. And so, no, I'm being absolutely serious.
Then we will have to only play romantic music.
Well, no, yes, but all of our music is romantic in one sense or another. But no, really seriously, will you have a program where people can get together and have a drink before the concert and then go out to dance afterwards, perhaps with some of our musicians playing in one of the lobbies? So there's a possibility for them to meet, to get to know one another, and to date. And I don't mean just young people, because I think young people have it easier from a dating perspective. But when you've lost a partner or are in a divorce, and today it's so much more prevalent to have multiple partners over time. Well, I'm not advocating it. But if we can bring in young people, I think we could bring in more young people with it.
So on that lovely note, go on our website, check out our future concerts where you can meet people. And Rachel, what would you play for us in closing of this program?
Okay, well, one of the messages that I always try to spread to non-classical listeners is that so many musicians in other genres, like rock musicians, are very inspired by classical music and consider it to be one of their influences. And of course, one of the composers that heavy metal guitarists particularly love is Paganini. I've been touring this season with the complete 24 caprices in a single program. So I'm going to play number 13, which is known as The Devil's Laughter. But it's not because of the fiery middle section. It's actually because of the diabolical chuckle in the beginning and ending section.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming to the program and bringing more people and going on our website to check out our program, www.newwestsymphony.org. Thank you.